People who had considered themselves incels, involuntary celibates, but have since had ex. How do you feel looking back at your previous self? Oh god. High school me wore fedoras and believed my superior intellect and science-based social theories were too much for everyone and that I was really a James Bond type with my knowledge of various fields. Turns out I was gay as frick, but so deep in the closet my zip code was in Narnia. Not really that smart in anything but too ADHD to focus past basic knowledge of anything and in a desperate need of a new wardrobe. So deep in the closet my zip code was in Narnia made me snort. This made me shriek laugh. I'm glad you have lost your fedora and found your gay. I read this as this made me Shrek laugh, and I was okay with it. I was involuntarily celibate in that I wanted to have actual relationships, but never met anyone interested. I didn't put any effort in, so it was kinda my fault. My lifestyle just didn't lend itself to meeting people, so it was hard. When I finally did get out there and start having relationships, it was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I realized that I had previously felt like an incomplete person because of my inability to connect with anyone, and that was holding me back from other things in life. Like I thought nothing else was worth pursuing, because I hadn't properly entered adulthood yet. I kinda wish I'd just got on with it and pursued my other interests a bit more. I don't know why I had to wait. Maybe it was depression relating to me being lonely. This is a good description of me too. In high school and university, I wore very baggy clothes, had lots unkempt hair. I was smart and funny, so I had some friends, but no one particularly close, because I never made any effort. Looking back, there were certainly a couple women interested in me, but I didn't know how to pursue it and was terrified at the thought of confrontation or looking stupid, so I didn't. I just expected things to evolve totally naturally, but at some point, you have to do something that maybe scares you a little or makes you feel a little uncomfortable, like discussing your feelings about a person with that person, or even just putting yourself in a position to be alone with them, even if it means you might not have anything to talk about. I would have told myself to not be afraid of what I didn't know and to make mistakes when everyone is young and awkward anyway. Like everything else, it just takes practice, and most people are as scared and bad at it as you are worried that you will be. Whether it's high school or as an adult, male or female, people want the same thing. Someone to be honest, forthright, and to listen to them. I was a being of pure hatred. I always thought it was someone else's fault. Even though I have had ex since that time, I think it's important to know that having ex isn't what vindicates you. Inceldom is a state of mind which requires strength and sometimes outside guidance to overcome. One of my friends essentially gave me a proverbial slap to the face on the subject and told me exactly what to do and how to become a more better person. In conclusion, I look back with regret and sorrow for all the people I hurt and made uncomfortable, because I know there are many, even though I have had ex since that time. I think it's important to know that having ex isn't what vindicates you. Inceldom is a state of mind which requires strength and sometimes outside guidance to overcome. This absolutely hits the nail on the head. Ex is not really as much of a part of the incel mentality as they think. They always talk about having ex, even once, as ascending past inceldom permanently. There's plenty of virgins out there who are not incels and plenty of people who have lots of ex who could be identified as incels. I had a roommate who still had the mindset from being rejected in his teens. In his 30s he still talked with bitterness about how girls rejected him in high school. As an adult, he got a good paying job and cultivated a charming persona that unfortunately was just a cover for the still present rage. I know I got sucked in. He seemed so charming and nice at first. Then the truth came out. Any woman who rejected his sexual advances became an object of rage. He made it a point to target women in their early 20s or even late teens, because they were easier to manipulate. He got a girlfriend in her early 20s, who he claimed to have an open relationship with. What this really meant was that he could frick anyone he wanted, but she couldn't without being guilted and emotionally abused. If she dared to disobey him in even the slightest way, he flew into rages that culminated in physical abuse. I got to see this side when I refused to sleep with him, even though he had a girlfriend. He tried to manipulate me to break up with my boyfriend, and when I wouldn't he went fully berserk. physical threats, property damage. He even tried to cost me my job. He was having plenty of ex, but the rage and entitlement remained. You know, I don't know if this'll be buried, but I can actually share something valuable here. I did consider myself mostly an incel. Maybe, more of a nice guy, but to my core I believe that girls were only after the chads and douchebags. It was from the ages of 12-18, so a lot through my formative years. Here's the mindset. You've never had any awareness of the fact that girls don't indeed chase douchebags, because that's all you've ever looked for. Whenever you see a pretty girl who says she is in a relationship, you immediately assume that her boyfriend is a terrible person. Though, not because he is, but because you yourself assume that you would just be so much better off with her than any other person. You won't see your own flaws, so you'll assume the worst of the guy. The truth is, it comes down to major insecurity issues and a lack of any male relationships. If you don't have many different male friends, you're going to assume that only the cocky guys get the girls. In reality, they are displaying charisma and confidence, something that is very attractive. Everyone knows this. It's a lack of awareness. It's easier to say that you yourself are too short, too ugly, too untalented, etc., than to admit that you have a crappy personality with little to no charisma. You won't find a happy, charming incel. If I could have gone back to myself and say, here's the deal. Girls don't look for one particular thing in a dude. They don't just want a tall dude, or a wide-jawed dude. They want someone to be comfortable around. They don't want you to praise them as some higher being. They want to be treated with respect. But most importantly, they don't exist to have sex with you. They don't even exist to be your friend. They don't owe you anything. No one does. Just because you like them doesn't mean they have to like you. Don't try to sleep with girls by being their friend. Be grateful that someone sees any quality in your person for them to want to be around you at all. Be grateful that someone wants to be your friend. You are shallow and you only care about looks. You saying it's about personality is all a bullet. That's it. I was a young, angry kid. I'm glad I'm the man I am today. I've had a lot of confidence issues which went away as I grew older. I went through many edgy phases, and it took all of these mistakes to learn them. So I feel empathy for incels, because they don't know any better. They don't know just how wrong they are. Because admitting faults and self-improvement takes time and effort, blaming and hating girls does not. Instead of hating girls, my only wish is that I started on self-improvement sooner. I also think a lot of guys hear self-improvement advice and think it means improving themselves to be more appealing to women. But that really misses the point. The goal is to be someone you're happy with, proud of, comfortable with, and confident in. I'm good friends with a guy who used to be a part of a popular incel website, and he used to post on Reddit. That's actually how we met. He is still growing a lot as a person. He was incredibly angry. He blamed being ugly for his failure with women. And nothing anyone said could convince him that it wasn't that. It was that he thought that he would only be happy with a really hot girl. We hung out once and were talking about how he wanted to approach women out with us. We were at a very nice place and the neighborhood had plenty of high maintenance women. You know, the kind wearing expensive athleisure and who spent their entire lives darting and doing spinning classes. Expensive hair and nails, all that. Women who were really dedicated to looking good. There were also the girls that worked there, and a few other customers about our age. He literally only saw the hot ladies. He was upset they'd never date anyone like him. Someone who has pretty much no career ambition, doesn't want to conform by dressing or eating like they do, etc. And the average women in their just weren't women to him. It was really dehumanizing, because I saw him as an equal, and although he was sort of my friend, he didn't see me as human as he saw the hot ladies in Lululemon. He eventually saw a therapist. Actually, a few therapists. It was mostly to tell people he'd done it, but he stuck with it. Saw a few until one worked, and he started working on himself. We texted, emailed, etc. Hung out a few times, but honestly he wasn't working too hard on making friends, because he'd constantly say stuff that was belittling or mean just to hurt me or women in general, because he could. He also had spent too much time in black pill subreddits, because he brought it up on the one time I invited him out with my trivia team. A few months ago, before I had some major health issues and the pandemic kicked off, he got back in touch. He sent me a long email that was actually okay-ish. He had briefly dated a woman. They had slept together, and then he realized he still actually hated women and her too, because she wasn't living up to his fantasy, and that no one could. He realized he had a lot of conflicting ideas, that women shouldn't depend on men for money, but they also shouldn't be too career focused, etc. Just a lot of bad stuff all rolled up into one. He had included a bunch of stuff I absolutely hated, like the fact that he still feels that women our age are past their prime and have cellulite. I basically didn't have a ton of energy to reply other than to tell him I hoped he kept working at it and wasn't dating anyone else until he got over actively hating women. I've seen babies with cellulite. I am so glad I had my teenage years in the late 80s and early 90s before the internet, let alone social media. Back then I couldn't get a date, let alone a girlfriend. I was, to be fair, hardly a catch, suffering from persistent depressive disorder, form and orderly Q ladies and just generally having problems adapting. I was acknowledged to be a bit weird. I kind of accepted that it was my fault, which was bad for me short term, but probably good in the long term for everyone concerned. Ultimately I had to sort myself out, but if I had had access to the sort of incelite online around today, I fear I would have lapped it up with a spoon. A very large group of like-minded people telling me it isn't my fault. I can stop moping and start hating? Fantastic. I'm in. I would have been able to celebrate my status, instead of reflecting on it and changing it. I'm sure I'd have been more than tempted. Social media has eroded, even destroyed, the concepts of privacy Gen X and before took for granted. For us to be an outsider, to be weird, was something you could do alone and grow out of, if you wanted to, of course. For the later millennials and beyond, even in quarantine, there is no alone, no solitude to reflect. Everything seems to be out there looking for likes and other forms of validation my adult mid-40s brain can't comprehend. Incels are a form of social validation that could not really have existed before social media. To get a network like that going would have been logistically and technically impossible on a scale beyond small outsider cliques in secondary schools. Now they are a movement. I somewhat pity incels, because, but for 20 or so years, I could have been one of them. I honestly think social media is allowing the development of a whole Pandora's box of mental illnesses. Some are derivations of previously understood mental illnesses, while others are just being recognized, like gaming addiction. The lack of privacy is something that bothers me too. Like I'm 31. I grew up in the 90s and early zeros. In those days on the internet, the rule was you didn't share intimate details about your life or even your name, etc. unless you trust them after a long period of time. And even then it was a grey area. Now, people post every innate detail about their lives and careers online, not just for family and friends, but complete strangers to prove of. I was just contemplating this exact thought several days ago. The internet of the 90s and early zeros was almost completely different than what it is now. Now that there are more studies coming out showing the negative effects of long-term social network engagement, links to depression. For one, I wonder what aspects of the internet we will be as a society will look back on with regret. It's weird to think how ingrained the internet is into every aspect of our lives and being. We upload so much personal data into the web, consciously or not, every single day. Most people have jobs that are considerably aided by the internet in some way, shape or form. When do we stop using the internet to live our lives? This is almost entirely the advertising industry's fault, particularly Google and Facebook. Google used to actually suggest that everyone use an anonymous handle. Overnight, that suddenly changed, and one day, you were now supposed to use your real identity everywhere. Why? Better targeted advertising. Massive tsunamis of cash for them. It ruined everything.